So, can I ask, can people sit there? So, you know, all those you guys who are standing, do you want to come and sit on the floor in the aisle? Or down here? I'll try not to spit on you. Let's just take a minute to, you know, so people can get a place to sit down, because it's hard to have to stand for a long time. Oh, this is just, you know, let's just not call the fire marshal, okay? Yeah. And there's actually a couple spots.
No, they don't want anybody over there because they're filming.
Oh, well, then I should have put on some makeup. All right, so if you've heard me before, first of all, how amazing is it how many people are here? I said, this is now the third book in a row that I've come just the day or two before 4th of July. And when I first, for Snowflower, there was this gap in my tour, and they said, you know, nobody goes on tour during 4th of July. And I said, well, why don't you just send me down to San Diego? And they said, nobody goes on tour during that week. You know, everyone's going to be gone. I said, well, not in San Diego. They're already on vacation. So you guys are very lucky to live here. I've been on tour now for 6.5 weeks, and this is the last event. So I'm happy to go out with a bang and not a whimper. And, you know, and I'm also still standing, which is pretty amazing given all the places I've been. Okay, so if you have heard me before, you know that I like to talk about stories that have been lost, forgotten, or deliberately covered up. I also like to talk about family, and I'm not going to stray too far from that tonight. You know, people often say to me, or people who are learning how to write often are told, write what you know. Well, there are a lot of things I don't know when I first start writing a novel. I'd heard about the women's secret writing, but I didn't know that much about it when I started Snowflower and the Secret Fan. I had heard about the lovesick maidens in the 17th century, but I didn't know that much about them before I started Peony in Love. Going back to the mysteries, I had heard about the global trade in bear bile used for Chinese herbal medicine. Believe me, that's all I knew when I started that book. And so what I do is I go to China and I do the research. I spend a lot of time here interviewing scholars and academics. I spend a lot of time at the UCLA library, at the research library, reading people's published and unpublished dissertations, things even their own mothers wouldn't read. I am a real pest, and I will, you know, go and sit on your couch until you tell me your story, and then pretty soon we'll be in your attic or basement or garage or closet, or sometimes even in the trunk of the car to find out these stories, until finally there comes a day when I can say, yes, I can write about what I know, all of this historical stuff. But to me, actually, the historical parts are not what my books are about. To me, what they're about are relationships and emotions. I know a lot about husbands and wives. I know a lot about mothers and daughters. I know a lot about friends and friendship because I've experienced those relationships myself, just as all of you have experienced those relationships. I know a lot about love and hate and envy and jealousy and remorse and guilt, and all actually really do well on all the negative ones. I have to think about, you know, people have been saying, can't you write a book with a happy ending or something, you know, happy, all the joy and love, and I was like, yeah, okay, I'll work on it. But, you know, you're going to have to wait a while. So anyway, I know about all of those things, and I write about them because I've experienced them just as all of you have experienced them. So what I thought I'd do tonight is tell you a little bit about the plot, a little bit about the history behind the book, and then go a little deeper to those emotions and relationships. So here we go. Shanghai Girls is about two sisters who leave Shanghai in 1937 and go to Los Angeles, Chinatown in arranged marriages. That's it. It's the first book that I've ever written that I can say in one sentence. Having now been on tour for 6.5 weeks, you just don't know how nice that is to be able to have something you can say in one sentence. So, okay, taking it from the top. Two sisters leave Shanghai in 1937. Well, Shanghai in 1937 was the Paris of Asia. It was a city of great diversity and great contrast. There were, just tremendous poverty, beggars and rickshaw pullers on one end, and then this vast mercantile and banking wealth on the other, and everyone in between. There were people who had come from all over the world to be in Shanghai at that time. White Russians who'd escaped out of Russia during the revolution and had found a refuge in Shanghai. 1937, the first big wave of Jews leaving Germany who, thought something bad is coming and had the foresight to get out, but when no other country and no other port would take them, Shanghai did, and they also found at least a temporary refuge. There were the French who had come in and settled the French concession. There were the British who thought they ran everything, and in many ways they did, but you could also argue that it was the gangsters who were running everything. And then, of course, there were Chinese there as well. So this was this final moment, 1937, when Shanghai was this Paris of Asia before things started to go downhill. In mid-August, the Japanese invaded. The Sino-Japanese War rolled right into World War II. As soon as World War II was over, Civil War, and then Mao took over the country. And Mao and the communist government took a very dim view of Shanghai. They looked at the city kind of like, a woman with a really bad past, a woman who should be punished for all the things she did. And so Shanghai went from being kind of the Paris of Asia to being more along the lines of the Fresno of Asia. Now, I will say that having been out on tour for 6.5 weeks, there's always someone in the audience who's from Fresno. So if you're from Fresno, it went from being the Paris of Asia to being the San Bernardino. If you're from San Bernardino, the Barstow of Asia. Okay, so there are plenty of places, but it went from being this very glamorous place to this kind of gray, drab place. And it wasn't until the mid-1980s that Shanghai had this rebirth, this renaissance, and today you could say it's now once again the Paris of Asia. It might be more accurate to say that it's now the New York of Asia, but it's probably the most accurate to say that New York is now the Shanghai of the rest of the world. So in this Shanghai of 1937, at this final moment, are two sisters, Pearl and May. And they were what were called beautiful girls, these models for Shanghai advertising. And the advertising took a very particular form. It was in posters and in calendars. And these women in these ads were sort of selling this new modern Chinese woman. She wasn't like her mother or her grandmother. She didn't have bound feet. She was well educated. She expected to marry for love and not go into an arranged marriage. She had this whole future bright, open, free ahead of her. And so these images that these beautiful girls were selling were things like young women playing tennis, playing mini golf, diving into a pool, climbing out of a pool, stepping off of airplanes, waving, driving cars, smoking cigarettes, dancing in nightclubs, drinking champagne. They weren't their mothers. They weren't their grandmothers. Now, I've been collecting this Shanghai advertising for years and years and years. I love it. And I have next to my bed, my favorite poster is framed, and it shows two beautiful girls. One is seated, and the other one is kind of perched over her like this. And they're lovely. If you're holding a book or someone next to you, you can see what they kind of look like, these beautiful complexions, lovely, lovely hair. In this particular poster, they're wearing Western-style dresses with these little tiny belts, and the fabric is a kind of Art Deco fabric. And, they're in this room that's all kind of peach and pink, and it's just absolutely lovely, like you just would want to lick them up. They're just so beautiful, except for one thing.